Hey, welcome to the table. You're listening to Andy and Janine Mason, and this is authentic conversations around the messy intersection of faith, family, and business. And today's 320. It's Ephesians 3:20. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask, think, or imagine, according to his power that's at work in us. Now to him be the glory. So what's the point? God gets glory when we partner with him and believe as he believes, and we see amazing things happen.
Right.
So if you're anything like us, we kind of get bogged down in life and we start to think small. We get disappointed, we get hurt, we get draw back. And Janine has got this amazing little tool that is helping people get unstuck and start to believe like God does for our lives. And it's called
It's entirely possible.
So, Janine, tell us, why is this so important?
Really, it's positioning yourself to agree with what God says. And so, like Andy, you said, it's very easy to get our thinking small and, oh, this is probably what's going to happen because this is what happened yesterday. And so, if you play It's Entirely Possible, it really enlarges your thinking to agree with the sorts of thoughts that God is thinking and gets you in line in faith with what He's wanting to do. And if you're positioned that way, you're much more likely to see the breakthroughs you're longing for.
So, how did you come up with this It's Entirely Possible game?
So I had been ministering with our good friends Steve and Wendy Backlund. They have a ministry called Igniting Hope, and they are people of big hope. And so had been with them for 3 days and was on the way home, actually on the plane, expecting to catch some shut eye. And actually, my brain just went wild with amazing thoughts like, God is so big and he's so good towards me. He could do anything, literally anything is possible. And so I started kind of having like massively big thoughts like, it's entirely possible that actually we won't need doctors anymore because everybody on the planet could get healed. And that's not my normal way of thinking. And so after a while, thought I better write some of these great thoughts down. And I noticed that pretty much every thought started with, it's entirely possible. So I started to play the game myself. And at that point, my travel experience was if I had to give my carry-on to the stewardess for them to put it in the luggage compartment, mine was almost always the last out. And I would be sat beside the big person and crunched into my seat. And you had at that time lots of favor and always seemed to have the opposite experience. So I started to play this game. Well, it's entirely possible that the only empty seat on this flight will be next to me.
Come on.
And it was. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And I did have to surrender my carry-on for that flight. And I thought, well, it's entirely possible, actually, that it'll be the first one to be there and ready to be picked up. And it was. And so as I traveled home, I think I had 3 flights that day, I continued to play this game of It's Entirely Possible. And almost everything that I said around that trip actually happened. And I paid attention. I felt like God was saying, this is something to pay attention to, this whole thought of it's entirely possible. Now, I didn't see, obviously, at that point, everybody on the planet get healed and not need doctors anymore. But it did make me realize there's power in agreeing with what God says, that it's entirely possible. And it's all based on he's so good to us.
Yeah.
And it's based on his bigness, that he has absolute authority, absolute power over everything on the planet and beyond. And if you partner those two things together and you really truly believe that those two things are true, he's both kind and loving and aimed towards me, and he's all powerful, then there is literally nothing that's impossible for him. So when you put it's entirely possible, it's like, it's not just possible, but it's entirely possible. There's something about that word entirely that gives it momentum, that says, like, it could happen today. And so we started playing it. I remember actually coming home to you that night, climbing into bed, it was late, and saying, honey, be warned, I feel like I've come back a really different person, because I felt so enlarged on the inside having just pondered all day, it's entirely possible. So we started telling other people, and people started getting healed, and people started to see breakthroughs. I can remember sitting at a picnic table and sitting with some teachers at Bethel Christian School, and another teacher came along and said, "What are you doing?" And we said, "Well, we're playing It's Entirely Possible." And she joined us. And I remember saying to her, "It's entirely possible that your knee gets healed." And she'd been having knee problems for a long time. And sure enough, the next day when I saw her, she said, "Yeah, my knee feels great today."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. So, and once I remember being back in Canada actually, and somebody had played it with a friend, a neighbor, I think, that had cancer. And sure enough, it's entirely possible that when you go back to the doctor, you won't have cancer. And sure enough, she went back to the doctor and found that she did not have cancer. So there's something about us pressing in every time we've played it. I mean, I call it a game, but it's really not a game. It's actually a way of life.
It's almost like tricking ourselves to partner with hope. Because I'd say that's the biggest thing we're seeing happen everywhere is people partner with hope. We get so consumed with small or negative or discouragement that we forget to dream, and that we're called to dream. That's what the children of God do.
I think it's, and I definitely believe it starts with hope, but I think it leaks into faith. I think there's something that gets on the inside of you when you, and you think about it, nothing is impossible for those who believe. You're actually, when you play it, you're actually partnering with Scripture. And so there's something of faith that rises up. And so every time we've played this in a big group, something wild happens in the room. That people start to spur one another on, and it can get crazy, but it's crazy good because faith rises up, and in the atmosphere of faith, miracles begin to happen, or we set ourselves up for the future miracles that are wanting to come, that are, in a sense, they're out there waiting for us to just stir our faith up. And when we do that, God says, "Okay, angels, you can deliver it now. You can deliver it."
I wonder if it's that if there's a perspective where we get so locked in on our situation. Playing It's Entirely Possible is it like gets me out of that and to start to think of how would God look at the situation. Absolutely. Well, it's entirely possible we get healed today. It's entirely possible that contract gets signed. It's entirely possible that my friend who's going through a bankruptcy in Germany, that he can't get signed off. It's entirely possible that happens today. It's entirely possible that something good happens, an anticipation of good.
Well, I think too, when you put that kind of time frame on it, because so often we've been waiting for our own breakthroughs for months and months, or years and years in some case, and so we just get tired, and your past, in a sense, begins to predict your future. So, well, it didn't happen yesterday, I prayed, and it didn't happen, and that happens, day on day on day, month on month. So you get into this place where you almost have got to the place of, I don't think it's possible. And so when you speak it out, there's power of life and death in the tongue. When you actually speak it out, it's entirely possible that it changes today. Yeah. Then something happens on the inside of you that says, wait a minute, it actually is. And you start looking for the answer. You start looking for the answer to your prayers that you've been praying, or that you'd stop praying.
So we're going to play the game, because you can't talk like this and not do that. But before we do, you mentioned talking about disappointment. And the other thing is, we had somebody that we know, actually their identity, they didn't realize their identity become their disappointment. So what do I do if I'm like, I don't want to play this game. I'm so discouraged. I can't even get to zero, let alone start believing for it's entirely possible. How do I deal, and recognizing, I've built an identity around disappointment?
Well, I'll let you perhaps talk about the identity piece in a moment. But I think when you first mention this to people, the reluctance to play is, what if I stir myself up? I'm actually setting myself up for disappointment. And yeah, you kind of are, possibly. That's a reality in some ways, I would say. There's a possibility that especially if you play crazy big, like if I say it's entirely possible that in my community, everyone will get healed so that doctors will have to retrain in wellness training instead of dealing with sick people, then, I guess it's possible that won't happen. I think it's That's choosing how you want to live. And I remember having this discussion with one of our kids actually at one point, and she had this thing with my mom about, she would say to grandma, so her grandma, she would say to her grandma, I don't want you to get old, grandma. And grandma would say, well, it's better than the alternative because you either get old or you die. And, she was quite young when they started this back and forth. And I can remember saying to God at one stage, I don't want to hope. I don't want to be disappointed again. And he said, it's better than the alternative. And it caught my attention because the phrase was the same. And the alternative to hope is hopelessness. And I've tried hopelessness, and it's really not that fun.
Miserable.
It's actually really miserable.
It's miserable. Its friends are miserable, and it ends in misery.
It's misery. It's misery all around. But there's something about hope that is really attractive on people. There's something about hope that sets you up for faith. And I believe we can train ourselves and actually train the people around us that disappointment's not fatal. It's kind of painful if you focus on it, but actually I'd rather live with hope and feel disappointed at times than to live hopeless. And I'd rather say that, and I can remember having this discussion that morning on the plane with God, like, I don't know, God, are you trying to trick me into doing something and I'm going to be disappointed? I don't want to wake up disappointed tomorrow. And we were, I think at the time, actually believing for finances for a house. And I can remember thinking, well, God, so some of my, it's entirely possible was around finances. And I thought, if I would change my perspective, then, so perhaps, and this was the discussion actually. I think I was saying to God, we need about $500,000. $500,000 would really change our lives. And, it's entirely possible it would get $500,000. What if I only get 50,000? Well, that's a good start.
Yeah.
Well, what about if I only get 5,000? Well, that means that God's on the way. Now, if you allow disappointment to speak to you, and you only get 5,000 or 500 or 50 or even 5, then you're disappointed. But if you have that thing burning on the inside of you, it's entirely possible, and you get $5, and you see it right, then you're like, yes, it started. We're on the way. And so I think there's something about changing your perspective, even around disappointment. And I want to speak just to parents for a minute. Don't stop your kids. Don't protect them from disappointment. Because I think as parents, we don't want our kids to experience that pain. And so often we try and dumb it down. They want to try out for the main role in the play and in the school drama, and we figure, you're not going to make it, sweetheart. Just why don't you try for this smaller thing? Instead, celebrate the fact that they want to go for it. Yeah. And then if there's disappointment that they don't get the role that they wanted, what a great opportunity to teach them how to reframe it and how to walk through that and how to trust God again the next time. Because if you teach them to dumb it down and to make it smaller, that's why we as adults are so much less faith-filled than kids often are, because they haven't had the disappointments. They're still big. Don't train them to reduce their faith. Actually teach them disappointment's not failure. It's not fatal. And let's reorientate it, and let's keep hope and faith alive.
Yeah. So Janine asked the question about what if I've had so much disappointment it's become my identity. And so this is one of those things where it's really dangerous, where if you've allowed your past experience and external experience to become what defines you, it's what kind of becomes my armor or my anchor, and it keeps me safe because I'm not going to get hurt if I'm going to stay in this middle place. I'd really, really encourage you that you're not born to live like that. You're born to live free, alive, full of hope. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. It's like we're called to be people of life. And if the believers, the ones with salt light on the inside of them, if their light gets dimmed, now we've got a real problem. So the world needs you to actually dream and go after this. So if that's you and you're recognizing, I've allowed some of these things to become who I am, to define me. I'd encourage you to write down those things that you've allowed to define you, and then come before God and say, Father, forgive me for allowing these things to define me, for this pain to define me, for this hurt, for this disappointment to define me. I lay that aside now. I actually give this to you, and I ask you to forgive me, and I ask that you'd help me to be only defined by you. As a friend said, I refuse to be defined by anything less than God's absolute best for me. And that process of laying that down and then bringing and embracing who God says you are, and that's going to get you back on track.
Absolutely. Ask him to highlight the things, the ways that he made you, who those wonderful things are.
So let's play a game.
Okay.
So
let's play.
Teach me how to play.
Well, it's really easy. You just say it's entirely possible, and then you think, and you can start smaller. So I'll kick the ball off. It's entirely possible that our daughter, who needs a car for her internship that she's going to have this summer, that it's entirely possible that we get either a great deal or we just get given a car for her.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that she actually gets given the car.
Oh,
it's not even
cool.
through us.
That would be even cooler.
It's entirely possible that she stumbles over a deal and it just explodes her ability to have faith for something beyond school.
That's great. It's entirely possible, talking of school, that all our kids' tuition gets paid off for next year. We've got 2 in college and 1 in a boarding school. It's entirely possible that God miraculously takes care of those bills and those tuitions and above and beyond.
It's entirely possible that every event that we have for this year gets full to the point of sold out.
Oh, it's entirely possible. I've been believing that, especially for Atlanta that's coming up next month, that we would have people begging us to come in because they're just so hungry to come, that would actually, don't tell anybody, but that would actually open up like an overflow room because there's so many people that are wanting to come.
It's entirely possible that people come and get healed when they walk through the doors.
It's entirely possible that actually people's lives get totally transformed, that they have such encounters with the Lord that they're never the same.
It's entirely possible that people walk in with lawsuits and walk out with none. People walk in with unforgiveness and bitterness and oppression and walk out like what's happened before, with a soul so on fire in the start they didn't even realize they had one.
Right. It's entirely possible, actually, that lawsuits, like you said, get dropped. That's entirely possible that people come in bankrupt and walk out wealthy with their bankruptcy dropped, and that people who hadn't paid for forever, people that they'd even forgotten owed them money, just pay them out of the blue. Checks in the mail. We've seen that plenty of times where people are at an event and checks start arriving and their office people are texting and calling them saying, did you know that this was coming? And multiple checks arrived. I remember one couple got multiple checks from the tax department one time. So it's entirely possible that all happens again.
It's entirely possible that the organization that is a non-profit that's going to be a part of this, that their income doubles just by being at that event.
Oh, that would be fun. It's entirely possible that their reach just increases. The work that they're doing gets increased, and that they have tremendous favor. It's entirely possible that favor over every person that attends our events just gets turned around, that where they were struggling to get inroads into their community, inroads for business, that it just turns and it changes.
It's entirely possible that the entire region that we are in, Atlanta, just some things like people are like, what has gone on in this region? The economic activity just skyrockets and they can't point to what caused it.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that the church that's hosting us there just has their fortunes turned around, that people start coming, that people just drive past and think, I don't know why I'm driving into this parking lot, but they come in and they get saved and they get healed and delivered and their lives get changed. Whole family lines get changed.
It's entirely possible that people are driving past and just get drawn in. It's like, and this has been an answer to their prayer. It's entirely possible that people, it's like the invitation shows up in places there's no way it should have been. And they're like, this is what I've been praying for. I don't even know why I'm here, but they encountered Jesus. They meet others, businesses are started, grown, expanded, ideas come, and it's just explosive in that regard.
It's entirely possible that anybody that listens to this, that everybody that's watching this video, that's listening to this, that they get so ignited, and that when they play entirely possible, that miracles start to happen. It's entirely possible that you today have a relational breakthrough, that family members are restored, family relationships are restored. It's entirely possible that you that are watching, that you get healed. Just because you're watching this, just because you're listening to us play, it's entirely possible. And something ignites on the inside of you, that your headache drops off, that your back that's never been quite straight gets straightened up and it gets healed. And it doesn't go back to being bad tomorrow. It stays healed, as it were. It's a full-on miraculous thing. It's actually entirely possible that if you need a miracle in your body, that if you have cancer, that, or you need even a creative miracle, you've got a missing body part or a fused body part, that's taken care of, even as you listen to this and watch this. I could keep going, but I want to give you another chance to have another couple.
We want to invite you in. It's like, I want you to actually just participate. Start putting in the comments below. It's entirely possible, and fill it out. And let's just see what we can do. And here's what we're doing. We're not just playing a game, but this is actually intentional. It is God who does exceedingly abundantly more than we ask, think, or imagine. This is us imagining. This is us asking. It's like, be anxious for nothing, but in all things, through prayer and supplication, make your request known for God. Entirely possible is doing that. It's actually prayer. So you could do this in schools and businesses, in government, in places that you're not allowed to pray. It's entirely possible that this catalyzes things like that to happen everywhere. So post them in the chat, share the game with everybody.
And keep playing the game. So here's what I love about this game. You can play it on your own. It's always good. But you can play it with just two of us. But it's really fun to do in a group. So next time you're having coffee with friends, you can start playing that. Like Andy said, in the workplace, we actually have a sign beside our dining room table that says it's entirely possible, just to remind us to play. And so the other day, I must have been feeling perhaps a little discouraged or something. I said to Andy as we went for our morning walk, hey, can we play It's Entirely Possible? Why? Because it shifts your perspective. And so I want to encourage you to play it often, play it on the train, play it in the car, play it anywhere you want, and then let us know the testimonies of what's happening because you're playing It's Entirely Possible.
So send the testimonies to contact@heaveninbusiness.com. We want to hear from you. If you've got any questions or comments, send us those. And don't hesitate to join us, heaveninbusiness.com/free trial, or meet us in person, heaveninbusiness.com/events. There's a whole heap of events that are starting to open up all over the place where we are traveling, getting super excited about that. So,
and if you come and meet us there, I'll even play It's Entirely Possible with you.
Well, there you go. So final words, Janine.
Hey, I bless you to really understand that it is entirely possible, not because of who you are, but because of who the Lord is, because he is so big and so powerful, and his love and his kindness and his goodness is directed at you, and you put those two things together, it's explosive. So I bless you to have the revelation of the truth of that today.
Have a great week.
Bye.